Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully, you got a chance to take a little bit of a break and stretch a bit, or meet some new people. Um, Always good to meet new people and make new friends. So, thanks again for attending MenderCon. I am Scott Ford. I'm the CEO and Chief Code Whisperer at Query Bytes, and we love cleaning up code bases and making them better, and just really helping teams do that. And that's kind of the reason that all this got started, was a recognition that I liked doing this kind of work, and Andrea was like, go find more of it. So thanks a bunch. So today, I'd like to talk a little bit about metaphors, and specifically metaphors that can be used to help us with platform migrations. Platform migrations are a challenge that we've been seeing come up over and over and over again in our conversations with clients. And I'm starting to think that this is because just platforms are something that need to change frequently. So here's a bunch of examples that some of these are actual real examples that we've encountered before in our conversations with clients or potential clients. We've had systems that need to migrate from an unsupported version of Python to a supported version of Python. A Java web application that needs to move off of the Apache Struts web framework and onto Spring Boot. We had another web app that was on the Play web framework, 1.x version of it. And there was no migration path to Play 2.0 or 2.x. So if the team wanted to move in the direction of a different, they in order to upgrade to Play, it would be this pretty much the same amount of work that it would have taken them to completely replatform. So they decided, well, let's just go ahead and move to Spring Boot. This comes up a lot. Pretty much anytime you have to do upgrades to a Rails application, or even a Django application, or any other kind of web framework that's really kind of foundational to the way that your application works. Anytime that needs to change, it's a pretty big undertaking. And then we've been contacted in the past about having a desktop application that was written using Win32 controls, and the people responsible for it wanted to make it look more modern and look like it belongs in Windows 10 and more modern versions of Windows. And then these last two we haven't encountered yet, but I've definitely seen conversations about them online where there's some Linux desktop applications that have been around for a while, and they're tightly integrated in with the X11 protocol. And now that Wayland looks like it's going to do well and kind of be the actual successor to that protocol, they need to kind of move in that direction and make sure they can support that. And then on the Mac OS desktop, the Cocoa UI libraries, they haven't been entirely replaced by Swift UI, but definitely augmented by them. And so there's new ways to build an apps on that platform. And if you want to adopt those techniques, there's a fair bit of change that you have to take on. So I think it's also important to kind of consider the typical approach that most teams like to take when they encounter this problem. And that is to just completely level whatever they've got and start over. And that's often what we encounter as a suggestion when we're talking to other people about well, if the foundation needs to change, then the whole building needs to come down, is kind of the idea. And so that kind of got me wondering about metaphor and kind of construction as a metaphor, and also and destruction as a metaphor. And the construction metaphor in the software industry has a little bit of history, because it was kind of used as justification for introducing more traditional engineering practices, and kind of big upfront design, and creating these big, grand, detailed plans. And the idea is that because software projects have been failing, if we treat them like they are construction projects, then they'll start to succeed. That was kind of that was the that was the assumption. And since then, there have been tons and tons of work that's come out that has kind of discredited this approach, pointing out like lots of different ways that construction as a metaphor doesn't match well with software development. That the act of assembling a building is way more similar to just compiling source code than any other activity that we might do as software developers. The source code is more like the design. So lots of articles are available, advocating for like source code is design. Like source code is more of a finished blueprint, list of instructions. And then what the construction crew is doing then is really taking those plans and executing them, which is what the compiler does when it takes your source code and transforms it into something that can run. And then I think the construction metaphor also falls short because it fails to capture the distinction between complicated and complex, especially as it shows up with software systems. So let's take a little bit of peek into that. So complicated is when you have like lots of similarities between projects, which in construction there's lots of similarities. Even in some housing developments, almost every house is the exact same floor plan, the exact same set of blueprints. There might be some minor variations, but it's a fixed number of minor variations, and the whole neighborhood gets built pretty consistently that way. And that consistency is what drives progress and what drives the business being able to make more money off of doing the building. So they're able to build more things faster and cheaper, and that's where they make their money. And that comes from all the room for optimization that there is. And another thing about construction is that for, I would say, the vast majority of construction projects, they rely on materials that already existed before the construction started. There's very little materials that have to be invented in order to do the work. And as a result of that, because you're working with materials that you've worked with before and you're working with materials that you didn't have to invent, then you're able to leverage the past experience that you have from working on previous construction projects. Whereas in software, pretty much all of these break down. Each project is incredibly unique. There are a few kinds of projects that don't quite fit this rule. Like if you're like a simple 5-page website is pretty simple to construct, and if you're used to using a particular tool to build it, then that can get to be repetitive enough that you're able to get some of those wins that we talk about on the complicated side. But if it's an application that is, has to grow and evolve and adapt in response to its users and in response to the world that it's interacting. All right. Can somebody let me know if they're able to hear? And then I will pick up where I paused. Yes, awesome. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for your patience. Yes, turning off and on again works every time. So yeah. All right. So then picking up where I left off, on the complex side, a big challenge that software projects encounter is that a lot of the materials that we end up working with have to be invented. I mean, there are like some third-party libraries that we're able to use uh, to to build on, but a lot of the work that goes into a software project is kind of inventing the materials that are going to be used to make the thing. And so that ends up making a lot of our past experience not necessarily a very good predictor of our success, because because so much of what we're doing is brand new. It can be incredibly hard to predict it. So that kind of like gets me thinking more about demolition and the way that it's talked about by a lot of software teams. And it's almost like it's put forward as the simple idea that all we have to do is just RMRF, or if you're a PowerShell user, remove item recurse force, um, and then the whole project's gone and everything's fine, and then you're just able to move on. But there are a lot of overlooked aspects if you just take that simple approach. Um, when a building gets destroyed or blown up or torn down, like in this picture, it's empty. Nobody's living there anymore. Their stuff isn't in it anymore. For most major building demolitions, they get like a lot of the recyclable materials out of the building as a prep step. So it's not just as simple as hitting a button and then it's gone and poof, everything's good. It's also important to kind of notice that the utility of that structure was providing, it can't be providing while it's being demolished and then in a replacement, something put in its place. Sorry, give me a minute to mute that. It can't serve that purpose anymore because it doesn't exist. And so the people who were using the building or the house, they have to find another one to use, and they have to move themselves and all their stuff over to that. And that's a non-trivial trivial thing that like takes time to do. And not having access to the thing is an implicit cost in this approach. So as I was thinking about this, it really kind of had me wondering, like, is there a better metaphor? Is there another metaphor that we can look at that can still give us some inspiration, but maybe give us the right kinds of inspiration? And so I started thinking about like, what if we kept some elements of construction? Because one of the things I've been really inspired by is the idea of like remodeling. So software remodeling is something that I'm a really big fan of. But then like, it feels like there's this like tension between all this evidence that like construction isn't a very good metaphor for software. And I just made the case that destruction isn't a very good metaphor for software. But what about like the built environment as a whole? And so what do I mean by the built environment? So if you imagine the city that you live in, and this is the city that's closest to me, this is a picture of Richmond, Virginia. Imagine the city as like as a thing, as a thing that is maintained. And if you kind of think of looking at it from the top down, like if you ever played SimCity, the way you had to interact with that and kind of seeing the buildings come and go, and people moving throughout the city, and it's like it's definitely more of a living creature than it is a static item. And so if we think about that environment, like the built environment, the world around us, it's comprised of lots of structures such as like houses, offices, stores, utility buildings. There are tons and tons of structures that are around us. And then those structures are connected via services. So we're able to travel on surfaces to get from place to place. And some of these, surfaces have different properties, such as like, you can drive a lot faster on a highway than you can drive on a street, and you're not supposed to drive on a walkway at all. It's just meant for pedestrians, or people who are traveling outside of a vehicle. So you have like these ways for people to move from place to place and location to location. And then you have also material and utilities that people use at those different locations, and that has to flow through the city as well, or flow through the built environment. It could be a town, doesn't necessarily have to be a city. But you've got all the normal utilities that you would have, like power, water, sewer, data. And then kind of on top of that, you also have like this meta layer of information that is constantly like moving and traveling throughout the organism as well. So if we think of the built environment as an organism, and it's one that if we think about it that way, then we recognize that like the built environment around us is constantly changing. It's not static, it's not fixed. There's not one single plan that represents exactly the structure of your city or of your town. There's something that comes fairly close, but if you were to like capture an incredibly detailed blueprint of your city or your town, it would be out of date as soon as you created it. And that's very similar to what we see on software systems when we try to create like, this exact blueprint of the software system we're working on. The other thing that's interesting to note about the built environment is that it never stops operating. Very similar to like our bodies and the way our bodies change, throughout our lives, and we have different parts of our body that heal and get replaced. The built environment around us never stops operating, so there's never a pause button that says, "All right, all work stops." Anything that needs to be changed gets isolated, and there's like a detour put around it. So like, in the example of like maybe a bridge that's getting replaced, traffic has to be diverted through another pathway while work is getting done on the bridge. But traffic doesn't get halted. You don't say that no traffic is allowed. You find an alternative path for that traffic. And complete disruptions are just not tolerated as a result. The people who live in these environments would not be tolerant of a complete and total disruption. So if that works, is there a decent mapping to what we see in the digital environment? And so I think that structures can be thought of as a kind of a good map onto applications. So we can kind of think of like the structures that we live in as a decent stand-in for applications. And again, like the construction of those is perhaps not a very good parallel, but once it exists, once the structure exists, the way the structure itself has to be maintained, I think is very similar to an application. There's a great book and BBC series titled "How Buildings Learn" that talks about the break-in period for a building, and pretty much like how like every building starts out with a bug list of things it's not doing well. And in that BBC series, the presenter tells a story of how Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings, pretty much all of them had roofs that leaked, and his joke was that that's how you knew it had a roof, is because it leaked. And he's just kind of like, we'll just deal with it. And so like I've definitely worked with software developers who've had that attitude about some of the systems they work. Like, so what if it's slow? It works. And so I think perhaps not the construction or how to like the building springs into being is not the best way to look at it. But I do think the building as like a container or as a thing that has to be maintained and improved works pretty well. And if we look at the surfaces that connect all of the structures that are around us, I think those are a decent parallel we could draw in the digital environment would be like communication protocols, protocols that allow different applications to talk to each other. And if we completely severed a communication link between two applications, that would be kind of seen as unacceptable. Instead, we needed to find some way to reroute traffic while we're making an improvement. And then the utilities, I think, are very similar to like the information and data that flows around in the digital environment, the information that we move from application to application. So another thing that I think is also helpful with the built environment to kind of help us draw some inspiration from is that change is a constant. So the world around us is constantly changing. The built environment that we live in, it's constantly adapting as people's needs change. New structures get built, structures get replaced, new roads are put in, traffic lights are put in, schools, parks, all of these things get added to meet the needs of the people that surround it. And so I think we can draw some really interesting inspiration, specifically when it comes to platform migrations, by looking at how some of these migrations get done differently, and they don't involve a bulldoze, but they instead involve an actual move of a structure. And so this is a picture of a historic school in Shanghai that was not only moved, but it was like it had to like be moved and rotated. So they designed this like these special platforms for it to sit on that it kind of walked to get to where it needed to be. And so I just like I find this to be a very impressive feat of engineering that they took under to move this building. And so kind of with that in mind for platform migrations, like what can we learn? Are there other examples other than just this one building in Shanghai? Are there other examples that we can learn from? And so I've got some historical stories that I want to share. A lot of these are from these are all from the United States. During the late 1800s and early 1900s. And the first one is the story of the raising of Chicago. So Chicago had a lot of challenges with standing water. It created this huge health crisis. People were getting waterborne diseases because there was lots of standing water in the city. The elevation of the city was pretty much the same as the shore of Lake Michigan. So water wasn't really draining naturally off of the city. It would like collect in puddles all around the city. And vehicles were getting stuck in the mud. There was like the streets were basically just mud. And vehicles were getting stuck in the streets. And it was, so there's just tons of problems all over the place. The solution that was devised was like, well, we need to install sewers, but how do we install sewers? And will sewers be good enough? So sewers kind of were kind of tossed out as part of the plan, but wouldn't be an entire solution because the ground wasn't like, sloped in a way that allowed water to travel well. So they got the idea to like, what if we could lift the city or list at least several city blocks up several feet or, a couple meters, and then fill in to create a new ground level so that there is a natural slope for this water. And while the buildings are lifted, it would make it easier to install sewer lines underneath. So that's exactly what they did. So here's this picture here on the right is an artist's rendering of the lifting of a hotel, and they used jack screws. And I think this project used like 6,000 jack screws, and they had 600 people who were turning the screws a little bit. The other thing that I think is really fascinating about this story is that most of the structures stayed operational. So like that picture on the previous slide was a hotel, and they still had tenants. They still had people coming and going. They still had people who lived there and stayed there. And there are news articles from the time with all these people who are like commenting on how, they didn't even notice until they went to leave the building that it was up higher. And what kind of made it obvious to them was that the steps were a little bit steeper as they went down them. And so also during this time, like, a lot of buildings getting raised, some building owners decided to use this as an opportunity to relocate some structures instead of lifting them where they were at. They would relocate the structure to somewhere else where perhaps didn't need to be lifted, and then they would build a new building at the correct elevation and then where the building used to be. So there was like this happened so often. There were so many structures that were getting moved around that people would commenting that as they were traveling throughout the city, they would have to wait for a house across the street in order to get to where they were going. And again, a lot of these buildings, even while they were in motion, people continued to live in them. People continued to work in them. Now, obviously, it's like, the house in this picture is probably disconnected from all utilities at this point, but it's still providing the utility of like, it's not a, it's protecting the people and the things inside it from the weather. And if you look at the artist rendering, it looks like the chimney is still blowing smoke in this house. So, so even while it's in motion, there's likely a fire inside that building. So I think that's really fascinating, a really fascinating way to kind of look at these structures as like things that can move from place to place while they're still being used. So then let's think of some, are there any other examples? Like, was that the only time this was done? And so, can it be kind of viewed as a fluke, like the kind of thing that just, it would never happen again. That's something that will only work in Chicago. Well, there's another really, really neat story of an island community outside of Texas in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's Galveston Island. And in the year 1900, it was decimated by what we would now call a Category 4 hurricane. Many, many lives were lost. The city was in absolute ruins. Some structures survived, many, many did not. The people who remained wanted to rebuild. They wanted to honor the loss and try to figure out how to recover from this tragedy. And they wanted to find a way to do so in a way that would hopefully mitigate the risk of it happening again. So the solution that they devised was to build a seawall around Galveston. The idea being that if they could, prevent water from rushing in, that they would reduce the damage that the water could do. But in addition to that, they also wanted to raise the city up so that again there was a path for water to drain out of the city. So they raised almost 500 city blocks, anywhere between 8 and 17 feet, so about 2.5 to 5 meters in height, and then they pumped in this like liquid filler to fill things in. And I think this picture does a pretty good job of showing how dramatic this was. So here we can see an individual standing by a telephone pole in front of a house. And in the picture on the left, it's already been lifted up to the new elevation. And on the right is after the land has been filled in. And so like there's a new ground level. And I think it's neat to also look at the buildings in the background on this picture, because it looks like the buildings in the background haven't been raised to their new elevation yet. So you can kind of see like just how high they had to raise by looking at this picture. And so again, it's I think it's a fascinating piece of engineering. But again, in Galveston, many buildings were lifted while they were in use. So not only were they in use while they were being lifted up, but once they were at the new height, they continued to operate. And the whole city continued to function as like some of it was at different heights and some of it was at other heights. There's a great website, the Galveston History Center, that has hundreds of photos from this time period that show lots of different stages of this progress. And you can see in some of those photos, temporary elevated sidewalks that were constructed to make it easier to travel from one house to another, or from one building to another, so you could just walk on the elevated sidewalk. And yeah, it's really fascinating, just example of like just humans refusing to back down in the face of nature. So the entire project took almost a decade to complete. Work wasn't completed until 1911. And then while it was still in progress, Galveston got hit by another hurricane in 1909. And it was the first major test of the seawall, and the areas of the city that had been raised were, fared very, very well in the storm. So, there was some minor damage at a few docks in places, but for the most part, it was a really good evidence that that the plan was working. So, another neat example is from 1930s with the Indiana Bell telephone. And this building was moved and rotated while it was still being in use. So the problem that the Bell Telephone Company had with their headquarters in Indianapolis, Indiana, is they wanted to move they wanted to better utilize the surface area of the block that the building was sitting on. The way that the building was positioned, it was kind of like right in the middle of the block, and they weren't. They wanted to be able to better utilize more of the surface area of the block for, for space to create new offices. Create new offices. So the original plan was to just demolish the building and construct a bigger one. But then somebody pointed out that all of the region's telephone lines ran through the building. And if the building was in pieces, then telephone service would be disrupted for the entire city and the surrounding region. And so well, that's not acceptable. So the solution instead was to slide the building over and then rotate it. And something that I think is absolutely fascinating about this is that the building remained operational the entire time. Employees continued to report to work, customers continued to visit. All of the utilities stayed hooked up: water, sewer, electrical, telephone. Of course, telephone, that was the one thing they were trying to solve. They built this curved walkway that you can see in this picture, so that people could walk down the curved walkway, and no matter where the building was in its progress of being rotated, that people would be able to come and go, from the building. And there are news articles from the time where they interviewed people who were working in the building, and they didn't really notice while they were at their desks that the building was getting moved. So this process took about a month to complete. And the ultimate solution, the ultimate result was that a brand new building was constructed right next to it. So here we can see in the background of this picture is the building that was rotated, and in the foreground is the building that was built next to it. So again, I think it's just a really fascinating piece of engineering that shows how the built environment around us, has been manipulated over time in ways that haven't introduced, service disruptions to the people or the things that are depending on those structures. So, what are some of the lessons that we can learn from the built environment then, if we want to draw some inspiration from these events? Like, how might that change the way we do platform migrations on software systems? And so I think, a really big important one is to really review the consequences of doing if you feel like a complete demolition is the best way to go, really, really think hard about all the consequences. You're going to have to move. You're going to have to move traffic, at some point. Either you're going to build the replacement in parallel and then switch to it, and then how long is that going to take? And is the entire new building going to go? In this case, the entire new application, is it going to be largely unused until one day when it's magically turned on? And how many challenges might you have as a result? Or is there a way to gradually start moving things over into that application? So if we imagine building a new building next to an old one, would it be possible, or would it make sense as the first floor is complete to go ahead and move people from the old first floor to the new first floor? And so that way you're able to kind of make this gradual transition from the old building to the new building, or the old application to the new application. And so I think if we can think of ways to kind of keep the system operating as a whole, even while it's in motion, then that can really deliver a much better experience to the people who are paying for this work, and for the people who are utilizing these applications to get their work done. It's be a much richer experience for them, because they'll start to see the benefits of the new gradually over time, and then the engineering team gets to see the benefit of not having to maintain two parallel systems, where they're adding a feature to old system. They add a feature to old system, they also have to figure out how to add that same feature to the new system. They have to make sure it works correctly, but nobody's actually really even using the new system. It's sitting empty, whereas the old system is getting really tested and strengthened throughout the use that it's getting. I think it's also important to Include opportunity costs when you're considering return on investment. So while you're putting all the effort into constructing a complete replacement, depending, regardless of how you do it, what is that keeping you from? What other things is that keeping you from doing? And it doesn't make sense to put the effort or to put the money there. Sometimes these platform migrations have to take place. Often they have to take place. But I think thinking really hard about like non-destructive ways that these things can be built in. And so this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I thought it would be interesting to share with all of you, and maybe get some of us thinking about it throughout the day today. And so yeah, I'm just really excited to have you all here. Welcome. It's really great to be putting this conference on again. Really excited to be doing this. The response has been fantastic. I already went over this a little bit, but just a quick brief schedule. So we've got three speakers who will be giving talks on the main stage here after this talk is over. That will start at noon Eastern time. Will be the next talk. And also, wait, nope, sorry, messed up. So at noon Eastern time in the sessions area is we're going to do the pitch session. So that way everybody can attend, even if you're kind of more interested in in attending the pre-scheduled talks. It still gives you a chance to kind of see what the open space is all about and how that gets organized and set up. So you can head over there and participate in that, or you can take a break and then come back and watch the first presentation after this one on the main stage at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then we'll have each of those last about 15 minutes with a 10-minute break. And we'll have three of those today. And then we'll have 3 parallel sessions in the open space. And so then, like, how does this pitch session work? Like, how should you stand up and say, hey, I'd like to create a session. Mike Clement is going to go over this in a lot more detail during the pitch session space, which will kick off here in about 20 minutes. But in general, if you have an idea that you'd like to share with somebody, this is a great place to do it. This creates the opportunity for you to share your ideas and get feedback on them, and really learn and learn from other people. Or it can be like, if you just want to create a session where you just chat, it could just be a chat session. Create it. If you think it would be worthwhile to have it, then go ahead and create it and facilitate a discussion about anything. So these don't have to be traditional speaker present slides presentations. These can just be discussions where people are talking about their ideas and sharing their experience. And from that is kind of the big goal of today is to meet other menders. So find out who else is in this community that you don't know yet. Say hi to them, get to know them, get to know kind of what their challenges are. There are ways that you all can help each other, which is one of the fantastic things about community. So utilize the tools that we have available to meet other people. The networking feature will be available all day. Again, Andrea said she's going to be hanging out over there. Feel free to explore and kind of virtually travel around and explore the space that we've set up. And then if you haven't already, please consider joining Legacy Code Rocks. We've got a Slack community over there. So any discussion that you have over there is much more durable than the discussion that takes place here. And we've created a MenderCon channel as kind of like an additional hallway track for you to talk about over there. And then also over in Legacy Code Rocks, you can learn more about our weekly virtual meetups. You can learn more about the podcast. We have a lot of blog articles that we post. We have an RSS reader that looks for like different people who have published blog articles who are members of the community, and we post those in resources as they come up. If you'd like to get your blog added to that, let us know and we will get you added. But yeah, let's just, really make this community and learn from each other. And yeah. So that's it for what I've got for today. So I finished a few minutes early. I can stick around for questions, although with the delay on Hopin, it's not so awesome. But here's my contact information if you want to get in touch and chat about anything. And I'll certainly be available here at the conference. You can hit me up via direct message in Slack over at Legacy Code Rocks Slack, or you can also get in touch with me via direct message in Hopin as well. So thanks a bunch for everyone. And I'm really excited to see the rest of the talks for the rest of the day and see how the open session develops. Thank you.